Hi, folks. Happy webinar day. I'm super excited to have our guest join us, but I'll give a couple of minutes for us to join it or for people to filter in, and we should get started here in a minute or two.
I like the happy webinar day because I feel like Tuesday's the only day that doesn't get a little name. So I have Happy Friday or Friday, and then we have Happy Almost Friday for Thursday. I do Happy Hump Day for Wednesday, and then it's like I guess Monday and Tuesday are kind of the only ones without typically.
Yeah, that's fair. See, for me, because I have like the three kids, so really the weekend is like Monday morning for me, like where it's just like, okay, we've got them to school. I can breathe I try to like block out an hour or two if I can, just to like breathe in the morning because there's always some emotional exhaustion that leaves after a Saturday, Sunday. So my days are of like Fridays, it's probably Monday morning. Turbo Tuesdays, love it. Or that's a good one too.
I like that. When I was in Portugal this summer, I every day felt like the weekend. So even if I had work, it was fine. But then since I've been here in Argentina, I've been feeling the weekends are very different from the
Oh,
weekdays.
really?
Yeah, I'm not too sure why. Maybe it's like I don't have a beach to go to every day, so it's a little bit more you're like locked in for the weekdays, and then on the weekends you can go do excursions. But yeah, I definitely feel the difference between the days now, the weeks and the weekends.
Yeah, it's funny to think of. You're going to be with the first three sessions, you're going to be repping a different part of the world each time. So you have a consistency to maintain as we get into the New Year sessions as well.
Yeah, it's like my new it's my brand, my whole personality for the next like 5 months. For everybody listening, so I was in Portugal and France this summer doing some work, and then I've been in Argentina here in Buenos Aires for 2 months, and then I head back to Canada on Thursday, and then in the new year we're headed off to Central America. So it's been a lot of travel, a lot of life memories being made, but it's been nice.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, should we maybe get into it?
Let's do it.
Not so. So anybody who's new who hadn't joined last session, just a really quick introduction. My name is Liv or Olivia Stibbe. I am a communication specialist, author. Sometimes I do hosting, like this kind of stuff, and general writer, I guess you could say, and really interested in all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've worked in the not-for-profit sector, the tech sector, and so wear many hats. And I'm really happy to be part of this initiative, which is just awesome. And then Jesse.
Yeah, Jesse, president of Ember, and I'm get to co-host with Liv and kind of live through her travel experience a little bit, and when we prep and everything of being out of the cold weather that's now developing in Halifax. So, yeah, I'll hopefully guide us through the conversation today, and yeah, excited to chat about kindness. I think it's something that's been top of mind, anyways, for the last while for me as I work both with myself and leaders.
And before we bring in our guest, I think I just want to see if we can set the stage about kindness. I feel like it's
Sure.
such like the term itself sounds so soft. And it sounds like something that
Mm,
maybe people would skip over or kind of think is too soft or that
yeah,
kind of
interesting.
line of thinking. But we're propositioning it as a really powerful tool in business. And I'm wondering if you can just maybe provide a little bit of
Yeah.
structure.
Well, it's interesting because I think it's before even, I guess, getting into the business standpoint, the idea of it being soft, I think, is an interesting thing. And for me, where I started to really lean into kindness, even with my kids, like we use the term being kind as the thing that we anchor and focus on versus like, let's be nice. And the reason why is when I sit back and look at even where those two things start from, niceness is often when you look at the literature about curating a set of actions that would hopefully create a perception from you about me. So the focus becomes about like this external image that I'm trying to curate. So you think about Canadians, like Canadians are often thought of as nice. Another side that you hear about Canadians is like we don't necessarily take on conflict very upfrontly or intentionally, or sometimes there can be like some passive aggressive things. kindness is meant more about like wanting to anchor the other person and what's best for them in the actions I'm doing. And for me, what actually moves it past the idea of softness is if you're going to be kind, you also need to be aware and understand your own emotional experience in what it is you're going to do and be prepared to accept that. Like, so I actually wrote a story about this from my own experiences where I think I really sucked at being kind for a while, in which um, I was avoiding creating discomfort in other people. I felt like even responsible for it. So I tried to be nice and maybe avoid challenging conversations or not share information with people with the hopes that I could fix it myself and then share it afterwards and be like, oh, look how I saved this thing for you. And it wasn't until I started to really understand what I was doing and where those actions were coming from that I realized that like I was being very unkind for people because I wasn't giving them all of the information to be empowered to make a decision on their own. And so when I think about it, moving to like a business side, as a leader, you have the responsibility to be kind every day when you're talking about an individual not meeting performance expectations, or you're talking about maybe trying to maintain behaviors as it relates to the cultural norms in an organization. Those mean you have to walk into uncomfortable conversation, but the reason you might do it is because you truly want to do what's best for the person or the organization that you're leading. Now, the other side of it is there can be many behaviors that are more joyous in nature, or to create more recognition, which we all want. But I found that the work is really being prepared to walk into hard conversations and not allow my own insecurities or my own fears or my own shit to get in the way of what might be best for the people around me as a leader, or as I said, the organization that I'm ultimately responsible for. So I share all that from the idea of soft or like wishy-washy, I think is actually the opposite because to do that, it requires some strong awareness and ownership and being responsible for your own experiences and how you move through the world.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I have some comments on that, but I also want to be able to bring Shandy in.
Hopefully we'll get to it like as we go through, but yeah, it'd be great.
For sure. For sure. And yeah, should we bring Shandy in now?
Sure, let's do it.
Absolutely. Yes. We have Shandy with us. She's the president of Arcora, and she has nearly a decade of experience and expertise in health promotion, wellness, and benefit sectors, and a bunch of other things. But we're just going to have her come on, and we're going to be able to dive into her expertise and her insight throughout this entire session. Hi, Shandy. It's nice to see you again. And I mean, after hearing what Jesse was just talking about, and kind of in relation to kindness in general, do you have anything top of mind before we get started that you want to add to what Jesse had said, or maybe it's not even related to this because I know you also went to Taylor Swift concert later or earlier on. That. Just what's top of mind for you before we dive into everything?
Well, I wanted to say thank you for having me because I've been reflecting on the opportunity to be here, and it might be the most exciting topic that I can think of to be involved in and to have a chance to contribute to. And it's only upon reflection that I sort of realized that I guess how I'd rather over prepare to make sure we're not interpreting kindness as being soft. So that might be a theme that I sort of bring forward. But what's really, I guess, top of mind for me right now, just like as a human, is, and it sort of speaks to some of that energy that you talked about, an effort, Jesse, is about being kind to myself and also to my colleagues, because it's a really busy season for us. And it's easier to rush through sometimes than to put the effort into being my best version of myself at this time, especially when you add in like seasonal illness and those kinds of things that tend to happen. So I think I'm just really trying to steady myself right now, going into a really busy season and making sure that I'm prioritizing the right ways of showing up, in this next 6 weeks. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of us who are looking at the next couple months and wondering, how are we going to do this in a way we feel good about? So that is top of mind for me, having just come back from a few business trips. But I'm excited about the topic today.
That was an awesome pre-frame, and I love that you actually brought like the individual perspective as well. Because I think sometimes when we look at kindness, we think about it as how I show up for other people, and perhaps not even what you pre-frame there is like holding the tension to both being kind for myself and kind to others, and how do I move through the world in that way. But I guess maybe from you, what I'd be curious to, because I know I shared my view of kindness and even comparing it to nice. Do you see it differently? Do you see it similarly? Like, or do you even see a difference between the two? Like when you think about the two concepts of kind versus being nice?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, a lot of what you said was very similar to how maybe I was thinking about it. I mean, when I look at it, I think there's sort of three different ways that kindness is different from nice.
Mm,
But I sort of see it as like maybe the depth of the experience. So like to your point around it being sort of nice feels like a bit of a social construct, something that's maybe eases the way for us in social situations. It's easier in some ways, and I'll
yeah.
talk a little bit about harder in others. But it does feel sort of surface level. And I guess you don't need to put the same, it tends to benefit us. So when I'm being nice, and sometimes I am, and I was reflecting on this similarly, like there's definitely been times where I've been nice instead of kind. And I knew it was the wrong thing to do, and I did it anyway, in part because I didn't have the energy to invest. So I think that the second piece,
Mm,
or the ability to be authentic. So there's sort of the depth of the experience, then the authenticity that goes with that, because in order to be kind, it
yeah.
requires more effort. You need to feel, you need to invest more of yourself, and in a more in a consistent way. And that being kind doesn't always feel good. To your point, being kind can be giving some really honest and difficult feedback to somebody in the workplace, or in your personal life. And that, so whereas nice feels nice most of the time,
Yeah.
at least for a
Yeah.
while, can it be fleeting?
Yep.
Kind does not always feel nice. And then lastly, I think it's different in terms of consistency. So I think it might be counterintuitive to think that being nice is easier. You can be consistently nice more than you can be consistently kind. But I think if you generally move through life in a way that's kind, it is harder to be nice across multiple circumstances. And I think that's where in a workplace setting is really tricky. Being nice and then is hard to be consistent because you're not really investing much of yourself. It's easier to move through and skip off the surface, not be nice in a way that you're showing up regularly when you're engaging with your colleagues or your team. And I think I was thinking about that question, and some of the places, some of my worst experiences in my career have been working with leaders or colleagues who were not who it only through their inconsistency did I start to understand that they were being nice and not kind. And
Mm.
that really can create a burden of unease for people in the workplace, and certainly has been my experience.
I
Sorry,
loved. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Liv.
I was just gonna ask, me say inconsistencies. What do you mean by that? Yeah.
Well, I think you can be nice. Like, I have a great example. I was talking about this last night with my husband because this really stuck out for me. So I worked at one point in my career, I worked somewhere else, and I had gone on this motorcycle trip with my partner, and it was a really exciting trip. I've been talking about a lot in advance. And during the trip, we got engaged. And he did a blog, and I curated a blog a little bit about the experience of the trip and getting engaged on it, and I shared it with my teams, my colleagues at work, and my CEO at the time. And my CEO, I saw them in the morning, and she had said how much she enjoyed reading it. She'd say, "Thanks so much for sharing it. I really enjoyed reading the blog. It was awesome." And then we kind of moved on to what we were doing for the day. And a little later in the morning, we came together at the team level with the CEO and a number of others. And somebody else on my team who had read it said, "Oh my gosh, that was such a great, thank you so much for sharing your news about getting engaged." And it was so obvious to me, and then the CEO was like, "Oh," like she was so obvious that she was sort of caught. So she had been nice in saying that she appreciated receiving it, but she could have just said, and would have been kind to say, "I don't have time to read it, but I'm looking forward to reading it later." But it became sort of this really jarring experience for me that I sometimes was working with people who were nice and not kind. And for me, it actually helped me identify what was more important. And for me, like in terms of
Mm.
choices in my working career, and maybe how I'd approach things differently if I was in a leader role in the future, so it's great learnings, but sometimes it's just the subtlety of that, and it's harder to be consistent when you're not putting effort in. But when you're just how you're doing your life, I think it becomes a little easier to know the difference.
Mm. Yeah, the thing that I also like you sharing in the stories is identifying that nice can actually be a really effective coping skill. And it made me even go to, the current work around like fight or flight, freeze and fawn, where, fawn is a lot about a nice thing because it's like your survival is in threat. And, if I think about even the example you share of the CEO, it's highly possible their time is crunched. I mean, you're now a CEO, so I imagine you kind of feel the same. So like you're like, oh, I want to still recognize and be nice, but to your point, there's another step that could have been taken, and it's also perhaps an easier step in the moment to just make that nice comment. So what I even like about that is further recognizing that I think we can often quickly judge the actions happening around us. And I see this in the work I do with leaders that most often the friction ends up happening because of some ineffective navigation of our own stuff versus like you're intentionally trying to hurt someone or what have you. And it just comes back to me about the kindness is not only for others, but also for yourself. And that sometimes you might get it wrong and you might have actually chose the best coping skill for those conditions in that moment. But how do you do maybe better tomorrow? And I guess in that, like when you talk about kindness being really requires energy, really requires deeper and more deep depth and authenticity within it. I suspect there can be some pretty easy challenges that might get in the way of enabling that. So I'm just curious when you think about competitive work environments or environments that are stressful, like what kind of challenges might get in the way when they're trying, when if you're really saying, I want to bring more kindness, but I can't because of.
100%. There's a couple of things because we talked about it taking effort. I mean, so I think it's perceived a lot of times if you're really moving and you're really moving fast, and I certainly have been in this situation myself, it feels like you just don't have enough time to like really attend to that in a thoughtful way. So you're just getting stuff done, right? And I think also it requires the ability to be like vulnerable and just like human. And so in some workplaces, undoubtedly, not, I've had some wonderful places to work. I've probably really on the balance of things had more exceptional positive experiences, really supportive workplaces than I have had the other. I'm very thankful for that. But I'd say that in some places that just might not feel like a safe thing to do, to really to prioritize that necessarily. And it may not be valued in the culture. So, within the organization. So I think I talk a lot about with the team I have now, and I guess in past teams too, in a slightly different way, but it's just as important to me how we do something as it is what we've done. And because, you can do things fast, you can rush through, you can spend currency in relationships, but that's not, I mean, that'll get something done once and maybe twice if you're lucky, but will you get the same high quality effort and enthusiasm if you, take the time to focus on the how just as much as the what? So I think that some cultures are better at that, and others it's really all only about the what. And I think that can look a lot different across public and private sectors and teams, like at a team level as well. I think if you take the time to build those relationships and show up in a way that's kind in a more consistent way, then it's easier to navigate difficult things because you've built currency that you can spend later, right? So, and then when you have to deal with the difficult thing, it's also not as disruptive to the relationship or to the work that you might be doing in your company or in your team. So I think I sort of really believe that it's like preventative investment, I guess, as a leader, but across everyone in a company. I think the last thing I'll sort of say, though, is for a woman, like being a woman leader, I think that there's still an added layer of it just maybe making you look like you're not as strong or fearing that you're too soft. I mean, there's that word again, right? I've had, in the past, much years ago now, but, the term like Pollyanna, like that's really Pollyanna way to look at the world. And I'm probably dating myself with that term, but, I've certainly heard that. Like, and I thought that maybe that might be true until I had an opportunity to work places and with teams and leaders and people who really prioritized like relationships and doing the right thing, and saw that you could be successful when you did that. Like that it wasn't true, that you didn't have to ignore that voice in your head that says, but it's the right thing to do is to treat someone this way or to treat myself this way. So I'd say that there's lots of reasons why one could justify not doing it. And to your point, Jesse, I think it's a really important one. sometimes that is all you have. Being nice is what you can offer right now for, as humans. Maybe there's other things drawing on us. I
Sure.
just find that even in those cases, if you're generally operate in a way of kindness, when you're just being nice, and that you're going to have to come back and course correct that when you have the energy or an effort to dedicate to it, because it's just once you see it, you can't unsee it. Is
Yep. Yep.
that you can't ignore it. That voice doesn't go away. Or at least if you're a reflective leader, I think, which a lot of great leaders are, I think that's part of the gig.
Yeah, I deeply agree with that. What are the impacts you see? Like what like and because the one thing I like, and I'll just pre-frame for a second, is I liked when you already said that like hard things are gonna happen. So the idea of like kindness isn't the removal of hard things.
Yeah.
It's the focus on how we're gonna do it. So even when I think about an accountability conversation, the kindness within that is also, you're not just going to blast someone. You're going to think about, how can I say this in a way that's mindful of where they might be at, and their emotional state. Like, you're not going to own it, but you're not going to just come and just hammer someone and say, okay, bye. And so what impacts do you actually see from approaching conversations, approaching interactions, just approaching your business practices through a lens of kindness, that maybe we might not be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I think like I don't know who said this, but like the idea that good relationships are good business, right? So like, I think that regardless of being in a for-profit or public entity or a private business, I think that that's true. Can you still have high expectations of people? Of course. Can you have high demands? Like, we have a very demanding workplace. We have a lot of things we're trying to accomplish. But can I also hold people accountable? Absolutely. I think all those things are just part of like your overall an effective leadership model, really, and kindness is sort of like the underpinning of it. So when I think about well, I guess what's missing if you don't have kindness in the workplace, it's things like it creates low trust, low unease. I'd say like that feeling of uneasiness, and I think it becomes a bit of a race to the bottom, because if you're not showing kindness, I think it's hard. If you're not receiving kindness, it's hard to want to put the effort in to show kindness to others. And so then I think that's maybe the most dangerous part of this for me, like at a cultural or organizational level. Like, it's one thing to have an interaction that maybe doesn't quite meet those criteria, but the more that spins, the more that has an impact on the culture as a whole. And I think that's maybe the most dangerous piece. I think that I asked my staff, this is one of the questions I asked the staff about at Arcora, and I thought it was one of the folks who responded works in our intake team. So they take calls from people who are seeking mental health supports or, coaching or what have you. And they were commenting that they really see firsthand the impact of the stress and the impact on mental health when people are not feeling like they're receiving kindness in the workplace. And how damaging that is to self-esteem and morale and mental health, of course. Also, they sort of, from their lens, can see that it feels like a bit of a balance. If things aren't going well at home, for example, but you're really being cared for with kindness and consistency in the workplace, you're better able to sort of manage your overall load, right? So it sort of can offer a balance to impact on a bit of a protective factor, if you will, on your mental health. And then, your ability to engage. And I was reflecting on that because like back in 2016-ish, I was going through really significant turmoil in my personal life. I was getting divorced. My dad had been diagnosed with cancer, and I had received a big promotion at work. And so I was creating a whole new portfolio of people and teams. And when I reflect back, I thought, God, how are you so resilient? Like, you go, girl. Waiting for the shoe to drop, probably, because it was a terrible and amazing time at the same time. But the kindness that I had in it from the CEO and the teams that I was working with there, it made it just feel so much more manageable. Like, I was crumbling at home and killing it at work. And it was because I had that balance of the two. Like, and at the end of the day, I was able to maintain a pretty healthy balance. But I'm not sure what I would have done had I not had a workplace that was so that acted with such compassion and empathy and kindness and humanness at the time. Like, I'm so incredibly thankful for that. I think it was the difference between a much different path probably for me, if I'm being honest. So So they really did talk about that kindness, empathy. Without it, the staff talked about the callers who talk about, toxic workplace cultures, not feeling like they want to stay, not feeling like they want to put in the effort. So I think there are a lot of ways that it impacts both mental health and engagement in the workplace.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually have a question for both of you, depending on your experiences. But like Shandy, you would mention that you've had kind of experiences both where there's kindness is the culture and it's not, and then Jesse, you work with a lot of different companies to assess the culture and help change. Is kindness becoming the default? Is that what we're seeing, or is it still something that's not taboo, obviously, but is it more up and coming in a lot of cultures and places that you work with or see? I don't know, Jesse or Shandy, if you want to.
I'll go first, but I don't have a lot to contribute to this other than sort of my instincts are, maybe it's my hopes. This is where I might get a little good. You may not be able to look at this objectively. I really hope kindness is becoming like a critical skill and business tool and environmental condition that people should be creating in companies, whether you're an employee, a manager, a leader, whatever. I guess that's sort of the world I want to work in. So I'm hopeful that that's the truth. And I do think that in my own organization, we have a very diverse workforce from, folks in their 70s, so maybe in that boomer generation, all the way to recent grads. And I would say that I haven't seen everyone delights in being treated with kindness. I don't think that even people who may have worked in a more traditional workplace in maybe in a different sector where that might not have been normative, is so appreciated. So I think for me, I'm seeing a lot of hope, and I hope that translates into expectation, because we can do better if we're not delivering that. Jesse.
Yeah, I see both actually. So we just finished a strategic planning session with a large school board in Ontario over the span of like 7-8 months, and they actually integrated one of their key commitments was creating a community of kindness, which was really, really cool. That came out of the various engagements we had done. So that was super hopeful. On the other side, I have concerns in that I think there's potential, but my current concerns are many groups we work with, it seems very transactional in the work experience, in that like people's days are so busy. They're kind of trying to do their best to manage between virtual and in person. And so we're missing the like general chatter. Like even, as we were waiting for people to come in, it's some of the things I love most with the clients I get to work with is the talk about anything but the thing we were actually supposed to be doing. It just builds relationship. It lets even people like signal that, hey, you're not alone in the world. And so why I think that's an issue is that I see people hold, I grew up playing competitive sports. I see people holding the hockey stick really tight and being very fearful of making a mistake where it actually maybe prevents the opportunity from asking a question or expressing something in a manner that gets spurted out as niceness or even harmful. So I'm hopeful that if we can address some of that and bring that human component into our workplace, I think there's the opportunity to build on, because people want to talk about experience more. I'm just concerned in that there's a lot of fear right now, and a lot of transactional experiences happening day to day that may not afford the opportunity to really put in the effort, as you talked about, to make it happen in a meaningful way, where it is easier just to be nice on the edge. And I come back to like the psychological safety research. My last point on that is the biggest violators of like toxic work environments or psychological safety is most at risk are industries like nonprofit, public service organizations, school boards, because it's like, oh, if you were to raise your hand up or talk, try to change the culture, it's like, well, don't you believe in the mission that we have here? And so it does create sometimes silence and more of that, suppression of our own boundaries, which in essence is not being kind to ourselves. So that's my two sides of the coin.
That's a silver second thought, is what that.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I think is important, like if we transition to like, not only just, I think everyone's into the idea. I'd like to believe, as you said, how are we going to move through the world in a way in which we're helping more than hurting within the interactions that we have, both with for ourselves and the people around us. But when you think about it, if we were to just push to like the more crass side, I'd say, and think about it as a senior leader, ultimately to drive any organization, we have to be innovating. We have to be being more creative. We have to be delivering on results and such. So, how do you see moving through the world with kindness as a critical component or focus, something that promotes that, maybe even versus hinders it? Because, like you said, sometimes it does require more investment up front. And if you're busy, it's easy to say, I don't have time for that. But like, how do you see that cost benefit ratio connecting?
I mean, I guess I think the return on investment is exceptional because we ultimately are not cogs. I mean, in particular, just talking about those fields that you mentioned, like the not-for-profits and large municipalities and large, government enterprises or not-for-profits. I mean, at the end of the day, we're people doing the work, right? And so if we want people to be creative and innovative, which is definitely needs to happen, if we're going to continue to move our agendas and our missions and our purposes forward, it requires mental energy and space to do so, right? And I think when I've been in a place where I feel as if the workplace environment, maybe not an individual person, but the environment is not sort of valuing kindness as a way forward at the workplace. I am spending a tremendous amount of time ruminating over my feelings of that experience and how that's affecting me. And it is very much distracting from my ability to be creative or innovative. It's sort of shocking to me in some ways how much time I have spent in the past kind of recoiling from some of those experiences as a person when I've been in work environments that aren't a good alignment for me. And so I think that the value there is that if you can put that aside and you're able, those work conditions are generally supportive. They don't have to be perfect, but generally supportive of trying our best to be our best version of ourselves and showing up with kindness. We're more likely to get constructive feedback that is constructive and practical, and we can actually apply. We get better coaching. We hear better. We listen better. Like if we're receiving that, on the receiving end. And I think that then it allows us to sort of park all those things and just focus at the work at hand. And I think at a team level, a colleague or peer-to-peer level, treating each other with kindness, again, I guess it creates the conditions where you're more likely to collaborate with others. You're not going to try to work in a vacuum. To your point, like we're a distributed workplace and almost entirely. We work across Canada and not in brick and mortar offices. And so for us, we do all the work to develop personal relationships, knowing about each other's families, kids, interests, passions. We really are intentional about that because we need people to know each other as people and want to feel like that they should treat each other with kindness because that's the right human thing to do so that we can work effectively together on the work at hand. So I think that the return on investment there, it's a long game, but the minute you start investing in it, it starts to pay dividends all the way along.
Yeah, as you were sharing there, it reminded me of some of the work that I've had the opportunity of doing. And I think what it does is create the antidote for staff almost getting into like the tribalism mindsets of getting focused on curating people to be on their side versus like if you have kindness existing and ultimately creating psychological safety, you don't have to worry about putting up your fences and protecting your island. Whereas I see this in some groups where that's really strong, is the focus becomes about wanting to convince people that they're on the same team as them, which is often about gossiping and complaining and oh, you won't believe what the leader's saying here. We can't, you're trying to get that happening. And it becomes such a significant time suck and barrier inside of team dynamics. So I love that you had shared that and how it can become a real effective antidote to breaking down what I would almost say is the biggest contributor to when people are showing up in that like victim mindset. That means they're often trying to seek survival. And we, as you said at the beginning, humans need others to belong. It's ingrained in our DNA. And so if I'm at threat, I've got to find ways to get people on my side, versus if I'm not, I'm willing to just take risk and contribute and be a collective. Yeah, that's a really, really critical, critical um, highlight. What if we were actually, you highlighted the idea of like bringing it in, and I think it's important to like think about it from a practical perspective. Um, how could someone think about wanting to bring more kindness into their company? Like, what would be a first step? Because again, I think it's easy to it's fun, and we can talk a lot about the reasons and the theories behind it. But when we're trying to apply it each day, is there a place that you feel is really helpful to start?
Yeah, this is some of the areas that I really prepared for this conversation, because I was wondering, well, am I walking the talk? Because, when I had a chance to lead this company a couple of years ago, yeah, I wanted it to be a place I was proud of working, right? And I wanted to attract people. I wanted people to come with me and come here and feel excited about the work, right? And come along. So I think that the number one thing to do is to make it explicit and concrete. I think that that's the most practical thing. And so there's a few ways. I think that allows you to attract and retain people who will also work in a way that brings kindness to the forefront. I was reflecting on my own experience. So it was just 2 years ago now that I took the president role here at Arcora. And 4 months later, we acquired a startup company that was focused on providing a new product line that we wanted to create. And we developed this, and we also acquired all their staff. And then we also started working really closely in kind of like a sister company relationship with a software development company. And then not in a way that they're just our vendor doing our work, but actually, an extension of our teams and our cultures. And as a result of trying to bring these three organizations together, I needed to restructure the company and find clear roles and responsibilities and accountabilities and make sense of this new group of people. And I think overnight, virtually, we almost doubled in size. And so, although that this was a very exciting time and created a lot of opportunity, it was also really risky for us in our company. Like those are big changes, and not every company can withstand that kind of growth and that kind of disruption all at once and in such a short period of time. So to help me figure out how to wrangle that, I used to refer to it as like the tiger. Like I felt like I was wrangling a tiger sometimes. I really loved Ally McBeal, so I frequently see myself in those situations. But I think one of the things I did was I hired a business coach for the company because I needed help to be able to, pull us all together. And so one of our first pieces of work with the coach was to identify what were the behaviors at work that we actually started with that we never want to see. Like what are the things we never want to see? And that translated over a series of activities to what are our most important things we do want to see in this company that we're co-creating together. And it really was an opportunity. But you can do this at a team level. It doesn't have to be at a whole organization level, I would say. I've certainly seen that done. And we created 12 core behaviors that we decided were our most important things. And I'm just going to read them because I won't read the descriptions of each, but you'll see that there's a real theme of kindness embedding a good number of these. Our most important one is to be a good human. And there's descriptions of what this looks like in each area. To be curious, to show up, to play well with others, to be candid, to step up, to be courageous, be humble, be uniquely you, to do the right thing, even when it's hard, to own your shit, and to celebrate people and successes. And so we use these core behaviors. So it wasn't a once and done activity. We didn't create it and throw it up on the website. I mean, it is on the website, but we then used it for a number of different things. So we use it for hiring. So we created job scorecards that identify, a position's mission and their competencies and what their accountabilities and outcomes are. But we also include these core behaviors within that job scorecard for every position that we have in the company and everyone that we create. And then we use that when we are trying to attract talent. So we embed these behaviors in our job postings, in our screening tools when we're hiring people. We look for specific answers. We ask questions that will get to some of these core behaviors in real life so that we can assess alignment and fit. And then once we've hired people, we use them on a regular basis in our coaching conversations to provide kudos when they're demonstrating these behaviors, but also to give constructive feedback if we're seeing some things that are misaligned. And then we've also made it kind of part of our DNA, or we're working hard at making it part of our DNA as a company. So we had a 12-month campaign where we took these behaviors and we divided them up into themes. And every quarter, we would nominate our colleagues for when we saw them behaving in a way that aligned with these core behaviors. with a little story, with a good concrete example. And then at the end of each quarter, we would celebrate virtually, because as I said, we're spread across country. And every nominee and nominator was entered into gift cards. We shared each of the nominations and celebrated them according to the theme. And so we just finished our first year of doing that. And now we're going to reimagine that moving forward. But it was such a powerful experience. We're a company of about 30, and we had, easily twice or three times that of nominations from almost everyone in the company over the course of the year. So it was really, it just made your heart warm to be able to know that people were watching and wanting to celebrate the ways that these behaviors were showing up at work. And it was a great role modeling too. So again, it sort of prevents that race to the bottom by making these things explicit and concrete. And the last thing I'll say around how we use something as simple as these core behaviors is I meet with every new employee who starts at Arcora, whether they're an employee or a practicum student or a summer student, and I'll meet with them within about the first 2 weeks to a month that they start with us, and really have a conversation about why these things are important and my expectations of them and what they can expect of me as the leader, so that I can sort of do some really important level setting at the front end.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything outside of I feel so often I love how you not only talked about the commitments, then you put them into operationalizing, then you put them into performance expectations. Is there any other way outside of like those scorecards and the performance conversations that you use to measure kindness at all? Or is that like the key? As much as I think you're well ahead of a lot of groups and having that level of connection to the behaviors, but
yeah,
are there other ways you look at it?
There's a couple things we're doing, and I'll admit that some of it are kind of like lagging indicators. I mean, they give us some hints though, so I mean, there is the stuff you talked about. One of the things we set up for a company are metrics, or key metrics. So for us, a key metric, we're a for-profit company that does employee assistance programs, coaching, business supports across Canada. And so our profit per X is the number of people that are eligible to receive our services. So that's how we direct our business, is looking, that's our critical number. But we needed a counterbalancing number for that to make sure that we didn't prioritize profit at all costs, and that we were able to maintain these sort of cultural commitments that we're making. So our counterbalance to that is employee well-being and engagement scores. So for us moving forward, we want to make sure we always have those metrics in balance, because I mean, what a shame it would be if we started to prioritize and incentivize only profit and not the culture of the company. And secondly, we have another score that's, I think, quite applicable in different settings, but we have a net promoter score. So we ask the users of our products, the advisors who sell our programs, the businesses who purchase it for their employees, how likely are you to refer someone to Arcora or to refer our services again? And that gives us, because we look at that monthly, that gives us a little bit of a hint on how things are going. Because if I start to see that there's declines there over a period of time, for me, it's sort of a red flag to say, I need to dig in and make sure that team is healthy, like the team that's serving that particular group is healthy and functioning. Is there anything unusual happening there? And so those are early days for us. It's just been the last 2 years that we've been working on these kinds of defined metrics, but it's been helpful. I think the other thing that, I guess I can talk, there's a few other things that we're doing that I think really reinforces these behaviors, but I know we're somewhat short on time, and I don't want to take away from good questions. So.
No, it's awesome. I thought as you were chatting there, and the depth of infrastructure that you talked about creating, it had me think of my wife who works in health promotion and like built environment. And, she talks about one of the critical things to built environment or in promoting healthy behavior is to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And when you think about driving down, say, low socioeconomic neighborhoods, often the availability to unhealthy options are plentiful, and versus the healthy options are either cost averse or not existent in the neighborhood. Anyways, with what you were talking about there in terms of how you want to focus on culture, I just kept thinking in my mind, like, you're really trying to make the kindness choice the easy choice in your culture, both in how you're signaling rewarding, both in the infrastructure available for people where they don't have to go out of the way to overcome a multiple set of barriers in order to show up in a kind manner, which I think it speaks to the criticality of forming environments. But before we get into like our closing section, we'll open up for Q&A to the audience for a few minutes to see if there's anything that was sticking out. And as we're waiting for some questions to come in, for me, as I was listening into your stories, it just reminds me of why we asked if you'd be open to showing up. Where when Liv and I and the team were prepping, I was like, we need to have Shandy speak to this because she's just a person that moves through the world with kindness. I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't even know if it was like a full topic. You're like, yo, I could speak for hours on it. I'm like, her moving through the world is just kindness. And I think that's what would be most resonating with our conversation today. Instead of speaking to all the research and theories and such behind it, but just about moving through the world. So I thank you for bringing that to the session so far.
That is one of the biggest compliments I have received, and I will keep it in my pocket and carry it around with me when I'm having moments of self-doubt as a leader. So I did actually call my mother last night to say how excited I was and how proud I thought my dad would have been, who has since passed, because he really moved through the world in kindness. I think that's there's good role modeling in a lot of our families and our networks and our communities, blood or otherwise. So I think that it was a real delight to have a chance to chat about this topic.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Cool.
I actually have a question. 'Cause I was taking some notes earlier, and I think that both of you, when you're talking about what you need in order to be kind, were things like depth, authenticity, emotional intelligence, all that kind of stuff. Like it's like a recipe to be kind. But do you have any advice for somebody who is trying to be kind and like develop these skills behind it? Is there any, I don't know, any practice? It's kind of just like doing it, feeling uncomfortable when there's things like that. I don't know, any advice for people who are like, yeah, we know how to implement it in a workplace, but how do I actually be more kind?
I think for me, it's like try and try again. I mean, you might not always get it right, but the more you show up and you can show your colleagues or whoever it is, if you're a leader, that you're trying, it's the consistency there though that I think is really important, because if it shows up out of nowhere and then it's this behavior's absence again for a while, like then you just kind of fall behind the 8 ball. You're just not going to be seen as authentic in that way, and people won't trust that you're actually trying to be kind even when you are. So I think it's like a skill as anything else. It's a bit of practice, and I think we know inside when we're not being kind. And so I think the other thing is to just own when you haven't been your best version of yourself. Like there's times where I've showed up where I'm like, oh, that wasn't good. Like I want to redo on that. I know I wasn't the version of myself I wish I was. And I just say to everybody again in this one-on-one meeting when they start here is like, I expect you to own that. Like when you're not at your best and I'm not my best, what you can expect from me is I'm going to apologize to you and I'm going to take responsibility for it. And like, well, so it's like taking it on the chin, right? But owning it. So I think that's it's the same stuff that we might do in our personal relationships, but it's keep doing it consistently. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't I had the same three. One was like the awareness. I think we need to be aware of what we're feeling in situations. I think without it creates the opportunity for those emotions to become more in the driver's seat of our actions than and we have more opportunity to move through the world unintentionally. The second is the consistent one. I see so often where we try to do these big things, and when you're better off to just do the little thing, like the James Clear atomic habits. Like, what's the thing that's going to take you 2 minutes to do? That's accessible, easy to do. I think that's more critical. And then the other one that for me, in really looking at failure and re-examining my relationship to it, even is when failure occurs. So say, the Shandy's point, you showed up in that moment where you weren't quite who you wanted to be, but you've now created a new moment to show up in a different way. And so by you actually going and owning it and expressing that to another individual, that in itself is also a kind act. Because think about you as the person who just experienced something where you're on your heels, feeling like you were just blasted by someone. You also spent some time being like, did I do something? Was that me? It's like, was I right with this? And that's only amplified in situations where you've got a CEO or a president with significant power and privilege. So the kindest thing you can do is actually validate their experience they might have had in that moment where you moved unintentionally. So to me, those are like three really critical components of kindness that could be helpful.
That's fantastic answer from both of you. We got some comments and questions rolling in. So just some of the comments. Love that you're able to tie it all in and think of your dad. Thanks for sharing this in general. A question here. Hi, thanks for this conversation. Curious how you may suggest defining or framing kind so an organization is speaking the same language around being kind. You spoke to your behavioral norms. Love that idea. That said, what I often hear is, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and the classic Brene Brown quote, clear is kind, but that sometimes broaches an unfair or unjust license for unintentional candor that is perceived as unkind.
Mm. That's a great question. And there's a lot of complexity in that. I know what you're talking about. I'm a social worker originally. And so I come from a lot of feeling professions, and I've had a chance to work in those spaces. And I might wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit. And maybe it's through time I've learned how to adapt that professionally. Because I think one of our behaviors is to be candid, but it's to be respectfully candid. And it doesn't give you license to not be kind to others in how you're showing up for them. So I think it's a little bit about taking ownership for, I'm really feeling strongly about this, but let me take a step back and try to have a conversation. I think it's a little bit of a whole bunch of things to frame kindness. It's about if you're on the receiving end of somebody who says they have their heart on the sleeve and maybe you're going down a path that's not quite appropriate for the professional environment that you're in. It's about setting some boundaries around what's reasonable, being consistent in what they are. So I think this becomes I'm using the term performance management, but I really mean coaching, I guess, depending on where this heads, and identifying how you'd like to see that be approached in the future, that how they're showing up might be impacting their relationships in the workplace, and including with yourself, if you're the person. So if you can see some observations, like some people might find this overwhelming, it could create some tension in some relationships, and I want you to be successful here. And so here's some suggestions for how you can honor that you have an emotional reaction or a feeling or a strong opinion about this, and how we might adapt it to the workplace. But I can see that it's creating some challenges. And I think that's the hard part, is saying, I actually can see that this is a problem, and not just saying, can you just, you don't want we have another one that says, be uniquely you. We want people to be able to show up for work. And this was actually one of the behaviors that they said they never wanted to see, but it needs to be by building mutually respectful relationships. And so treating others in a way that you think is appropriate in the workplace, and then being open to having feedback when you're not showing up the same way. But again, that can only be accomplished when leaders, in this case, for example, starting there as managers, role model that consistently and have that expectation of other leaders in the company. Like it has to sort of happen at all levels, but without consistency, whoever it is that's doing that coaching, you're just not going to get anywhere. You're going to see that behavior show up over and over again, because it has to be consistent. How you show up, no matter what you're doing, has to be consistent. That was a long ramble today, but there's so much there, but it was a great question.
I deeply agree too around making sure that we're setting norms up front and including people's voice in those norms, because it's highly possible that how we view it could be different, and then collectively find alignment on what the action's going to be like, or what the commitment's going to be going forward. There's a frame I like to use within leaders or even staff on coaching conversations. I think too often when we go to express a disappointment in a scenario, we come with wanting to convey our argument first. So it's like everyone's bringing their MO to the fight, and the objective isn't necessarily to win the fight, and it almost never is. So what I like to encourage leaders to do is, one, you would pre-frame that you'd want to have a conversation regarding ABC. The second is then ask someone, like, how did you find that scenario? How did you find that situation went? Like, so say practically, say I felt something didn't quite connect. I would say, hey, Shandy, do you mind if we did a quick debrief on the session today? I'd love to hear your perspective. And then ask some follow-ups, ask some curious questions about what they thought. The next phase I find really helpful is then to ask, would you be open to hearing my perspective on the scenario? Which almost always comes with a yes. And the benefit of that is the person has now offloaded all of their things and their stories and their MO, that they now got freed up brain units to hear something different. And then the final phase is often, now that we know there might have been a misalignment, what would you encourage? How would you think we could move forward or do something differently next time? And again, I think that creates more empowerment. So when you talk about the practicality of applying it as a leader, I think those are really effective ways of creating connection points where you're holding boundaries. Um, yeah, go ahead, Liv.
No, I was just going to say, we have one last question. Do you think we have
Sure.
time for it before we go into the conclusion section? But the question is, do you have strategies that you can use for people who are not receptive to this kind of coaching? I think that was in response, Shandy, when you were giving your answer.
You know, I saw it pop up and I was like, oh, another good question. This is an amazing audience. I think there's a couple things that I think I just would want to close on here. And again, being kind doesn't mean holding people, not holding them accountable, right? So I think that as a business owner, leader, you know, team manager, what have you, like that's our responsibility to make sure that we're not lowering the bar to the point where it's impacting the rest of the team. So I would say one tool, because coachability is certainly a thing, and not everybody is coachable in the way that maybe we all wish they were. Actually employing a coach, sometimes having access to resources outside of the business, a neutral, you know, thought partner, person who can help them sort of see themselves in a different light, can be a really effective tool. It's one of the products, because we know it's so effective. I've had a coach for years. Now we're making coaching available to the clients that we serve through our business. I really believe strongly in that being a powerful tool, and it takes the employer or the leader out of the hot seat, and I think creates some space for some more healthy conversations. I think though the other thing is it's also appropriate that sometimes you need to offboard someone out of your organization if they can't align to what you say is important and the ways that you're asking others to show up and behave, and that's kind too. So I have offboarded people, you know, and I've been very intentional to ensure that first, before I make that decision, I've done everything in my power to create conditions where they can be successful. So I've given them the resources, the supports, the training, the time. And that the people, you know, who may be their direct supervisors have done so too, because I can't live with us not doing our job in that regard. But also making sure that we treat them with kindness throughout that process, because if you do need to offboard someone, doing so in a way that is kind and very human is important, not just for the person who is now leaving your company, but for everyone else who is left behind. Because people don't just leave organizations and relationships they built at work. If you can be sure that you've treated them with kindness, it will prevent any really significantly and negative disruptions to the rest of your team and the culture at your company. But it is unkind to everyone else to not hold each other accountable to these kinds of you know, behaviors at work, because it becomes a race to the bottom. It becomes there's a quote that says your organization's culture is only as good as the worst behavior you tolerate. Well, it's pretty quick that can happen. And why would I be held accountable if you're not holding that person accountable? And I think that's really a very powerful lesson for all of us to not lose sight of. It's hard to offboard people. It feels terrible, but it can be really, really important when you're trying to protect the whole of the people that, you know, work for you and that you're trying to care for in your leader role.
That was great. Just as we wrap up, a couple of rapid fire questions at you. What was the best advice that was so good you got to let us know, or so bad that you want to warn us of so we don't take that forward?
You know what? I was laughing about this again last night. My worst advice I think I ever received, or I'm choosing to perceive it as the worst advice, is to strip all humanness out of my business email communications. And this was not in my current company, as you might imagine, but from a peer in a former workplace who took the time to edit an email I had sent that was explaining that we'd had some significant disability. We had some teams who dramatically lost overnight due to a whole bunch of things, personal trauma, illness, and the team was cut in like 70%. And they were a serving team across the organization. I sent an email sort of explaining the circumstances, that we were going to have to make some adjustments in the priorities. We appreciated people's patience with us as we figured it out. We'd be working hard to, you know, do this, and gratitude for how supportive they've been of the team. And this person took my email and resent it back to me, having taken the time to strip every human component out of that email, simply to just distill down to the message that this is what's happening, effective immediately, and then came to see me and explain how he could successfully get my emails down to 30%. And just by removing all of that part. And I was like, except for you took you took everything that was authentic about me and the way I show up at work and the humanness I want to instill in others and how I want my team to feel supported. and you've removed it. And like, I can't live with that advice. So I guess I've chosen to identify that as the worst piece of advice, because so far I haven't gone back to doing that, and it seems to have worked out just fine. But I do giggle about it every once in a while, and also wonder how much time did he have on his hands?
And our last question, then we're going to wrap up, and I know we're at time, but we have a tradition where we ask the previous guest to send us in a question for the next guest, not knowing who they are or what the topic is. And the question we had for you is, what gave you joy today, and what will you do to find some more?
Uh, That's a great question. I think for me, yesterday I had a 4-hour session with my team and our business coach, and the work we're doing is really overwhelming and it feels very hard right now. And I was reflecting on why I was feeling so good today, and it was because I asked for help and I received such great help from the coach and the rest of my team. So I didn't feel alone. And so I think that idea was that by asking for help, that allowed the joy in the process to actually surface instead of
Oh, great.
maybe being missing. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Shandy, again, for taking the time to share with us and demonstrate how to move through the world with kindness. For those listening still, we'll be back next month speaking to values with 2 guests that we're really excited about having as well. And also for those that are in the Edmonton area or Alberta area, AMPS is putting on a really great conference next week with some various speakers who are going to be attending on speaking about psychological safety, mental health. So check out that as well. You can find it on the AMSA website. Thanks again, and thank you, Shandy. Thanks, Liv, for sitting in and helping us guide through and keep us relatively on time. And thanks again, everybody, for your time and effort today. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.